Welcome, and thanks for listening to this week's episode of
The Milk Production.
The Milk Production.
Welcome to this week's episode of The Milk Production. As you can see, it's once again just me, your host, Meaghan Selki, lactation consultant, mama, avid reader, sharer of information, bird stalker, vigorous walker, all sorts of fun things going on here. I am super excited, despite the fact that we don't have my lovely co-host, one Russ Rakestraw, who I'm missing a great deal. I'm super excited to have with us a guest on The Milk Production, an author, none other than Catherine Watson Genna. If you are a lactation consultant like myself, you might geek out a little bit. I felt a little bit like a fangirl leading up to this episode and even just reaching out to her because I was so excited to talk to her about her expertise and the research that she's done and pick her brain a little bit. So I'm very much looking forward to sharing that with you all. She has a very extensive background in research. She has published one of the books that, as lactation consultants, it's the more or less the Bible on infant sucking skills. And it's research-based, and I love that. I think that's the most important thing that we can offer our families is research-based breastfeeding support. So really excited to have her on. Without further ado, we'll just kick it over to the interview and see how that went. So we're really lucky to have Catherine Watson Genna with us today. Catherine has extensive experience as an international board certified lactation consultant. She runs her own private practice and is very involved and published with research and doing lots of different research projects, which have come to reveal a lot of good information that we rely on. She also has authored a book on infant sucking skills, and today we have her on to talk about how the body decides how much milk to make. Catherine, over to you. Anything you want to add about your background, or if you just want to jump in?
Hi, thanks so much for having me first.
My pleasure.
And I think my education was a great setup for doing what we do. Having a biology degree, doing some graduate work, was so valuable in learning to put the scientific information together. And then my volunteer work as a latch league leader taught me the natural and the instinctual, and putting those two things together, I think, is very powerful.
Oh, that's so true. I love that. And it wasn't until my personal experience, really, the education was fascinating. I knew that was the direction I wanted to go, but it was exactly what you said, getting with the moms and seeing it in person that really brought it all together for me. So the subject, how the body decides how much milk to make. Over to you if you can tee it up with a brief summary of the general process about how we make milk, and then we'll dive into the different categories about factors that might impact that.
Absolutely. So most breasts work, like most hearts work, and most brains work, and most livers work. Now, we know in biology it's so complicated that nothing is perfect. But many moms are really worried that they don't have enough milk, and that can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. But the body has a whole bunch of ways to make sure that it makes the amount of milk that each individual baby needs. But you need to understand the system and work with it. And that's what I'd like to talk about today. During pregnancy, the breast makes all the machinery to make milk from scratch. There's some stem cells, they're the building materials sitting there, and then they build this whole milk factory. And then those very first few hours and days after the baby's born, this factory is super sensitive to its market research. So the more product is sold, the more the baby nurses, the more the baby goes to breast, the more this factory expands. But very quickly, if there isn't demand, if we're not taking milk out early and frequently those first hours and days after birth, then the factory manager starts laying off workers. Because why should your body use all this energy? Our breasts, when they're making milk, use more energy than our brain. Our brain uses the most energy in our body. So we don't want to waste energy if, God forbid, something happened to the baby.
Right.
and we don't have a live baby.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the way the system works.
Mm-hmm. It's an efficient system. I love that you dropped that bit of knowledge, and I always remind people in my appointments when we're talking about supply, tell them a little nerd fact for you, but your brain usually uses a lot of it, the most energy, but right now it's your breasts that are doing all the work and it's using even more than your brain. I always find that fact so fascinating. So one of the questions that came to mind while I was thinking about our discussion is, there's research that says in the first 3 to 5 days that demand is very critical for the long-term supply. Do you see that prove out? Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
For sure. Lisa Marasco, one of our colleagues, who's absolutely brilliant, talks about how your milk supply has to take off like a rocket to achieve escape velocity. If a rocket doesn't go fast enough in the beginning, it falls back to earth. It can't get through the gravity well. So it's very much the same for the milk supply.
I love
There are
that
these
analogy.
really cool milk making cells that have 2 nuclei. So with 2 nuclei, you can process proteins faster, and they're very sensitive to survival signals. They need lots of baby sucking, which causes prolactin to be released, which gives those cells survival signals and keeps them alive. Those are our really good, efficient workers in our factory.
Mm-hmm.
So we're starting to learn about the biology, why the biology works the way we've observed that it works clinically.
That's so fascinating.
And that's what fascinates me.
My husband and I were joking that we're both a little science nerdy, but he's more of the physics variety and I am more of the biology variety. I'm a big fan of biology. So,
physicists think that their field is the most complicated, but ours is.
yeah.
It just is. My motto about biology, it's more complicated than you thought.
Yes.
It just is.
Yes. I told him, I said, it just seems like we'll never have it all figured out because we won't. And I think that to me is the mind-blowing part. And there's stuff we haven't figured out about physics too.
It's true, especially the harmonizing quantum mechanics and
Right.
gravity.
There's plenty of interesting stuff left to explore. It's just that I prefer the biology side. So anyway, a couple of other questions for you about factors that might impact it. This is a question that I get a lot in practice and would love to be able to just remind, and I do try to remind moms, the importance of overnight breastfeeding or pumping if they're deciding that they're wanting to be exclusive pumpers or something like that. It seems that there's an influence in the early days about continuing to pump overnight. Now, at a certain point, we know that drops off because babies start to sleep through the night and your supply is maintained. But any insight into why it's so critical in those early days to continue that pumping overnight?
So if we're pumping, pumps don't work quite as well as babies because babies use a combination of suction and gentle compression. And pumps mostly use suction. There's a few that are just starting to use a little bit of compression, but none of them are in that smooth, beautiful pattern that a baby uses, that the breast really responds to. So moms that are pumping need to work harder. There's also the pump doesn't say, hey, you haven't fed me in a while. So it's harder to keep up. There's a really cool trick that Judy Levan Fram, who's a lactation consultant and physical therapist in Brooklyn, and Kay Hoover, who's a very famous lactation consultant and teacher, thought up, that moms who are pumping can take 8 or 12, however many times a day they need to pump, little treats. It could be nuts or grapes or chocolate chips or whatever, and put them in a tiny little cup on their pump or next to their pump. And every time they pump, they eat one. So they have a counter and a reward for pumping. Because the plastic baby just isn't as cute as our real baby.
That's very true. And that line of thinking gets me to other factors. So also important for the breastfeeding mom, but again, like you said, the baby is conveying to the mom when you're breastfeeding that on-demand part of it. And so if they need more, they're asking for it in the middle of the night. And if they're not, they don't have to. And mom doesn't have to wake up.
Right. Just want the breast to not get too full in those first 6 weeks or so. That's that critical time where the breast adjusts its expectations of how much milk it's going to make. So in those first 6 weeks, we don't want you to get engorged.
Right.
we don't want your breasts to get heavy and uncomfortable. Because those are signs that we're not taking milk out and we're starting to get fluid shifts that are causing swelling. And then that makes it hard to take the milk out. So our therapeutic breast massage with very gentle lymphatic massage can help that. And lactation consultants often know how to do that and can show you.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's really helpful. But so not letting your breasts get too full, because remember, then the factory manager is going to lay off those really efficient workers.
Yep. That's a great explanation. I love that. What about, so this one is, I keep seeing this, and there are a couple that keep coming up in practice that I find very interesting. So I'll just shoot them your way and you give me your thoughts and let me know what you think. Hypothyroidism, really, thyroid issues in general, they can impact supply. A lot of times I'll just say it's a coin toss. We don't know whether that's going to be a factor or not. Do you find that moms who have managed their hypothyroidism or hyperthyroidism with medication have a better opportunity to make more milk, or could it still potentially be affecting the supply regardless of medication?
So if hypothyroidism is diagnosed early and treated promptly, we see better results. The breast has different windows of development, so it makes a big developmental spurt during puberty. So if you're insulin resistant during puberty, or you're hypothyroid during puberty, or you have other sorts of metabolic issues, that can impact the development of those raw materials that are later used to create the milk-making tissue. So there's these different windows of development. And if we have a problem during those windows of development, even treating it later may not be as effective. Most moms with hypothyroidism can make at least some milk, and many can make all the milk the baby needs, but it takes more work. So if you know you're hypothyroid during pregnancy, want to be well into the normal range of TSH during your pregnancy, and then you want to continue to be well into the normal range of TSH, the thyroid stimulating hormone. Your thyroid makes more if your thyroid hormones are low.
Okay.
And so, that helps.
So if you find it's well managed during pregnancy, how soon is too soon to get blood work afterward to make sure it's continuing to be well managed and in the right range?
We're not fully sure.
Okay.
We think that the body largely recovers from a lot of the changes of pregnancy in 6 weeks, but it can even take 3 months to fully make those changes. So probably having a 6-week checkup, maybe a little earlier if a mom is struggling with milk production, doing all the right things, and still having difficulty.
And you mentioned, so when you were talking about other sort of pre-existing conditions that might be impacting the development of the breast, the different timelines, you did talk about metabolic things. Obviously, obesity is a metabolic issue, or can be. It can certainly be related to metabolic issues.
People can have a higher BMI and have a healthy metabolism, or a higher BMI because they're insulin resistant. And these things play on each other. Once you're insulin resistant, it's way easier to gain weight, and then you get more insulin resistant. So it's like a vicious circle that our body can get stuck on. So I want to take the blame and the fault off of this, because it's not.
I think your point is very well made about making sure we don't put blame on an individual, because that's not what's going on. So the research does say that if you have obesity, you could be at risk of not making as much milk. Do you see that as related to that insulin resistance that you're talking about? And that's pretty much the factor.
It's a huge factor. Insulin has this trophic or tissue building effect on the breast, both during puberty and during pregnancy. So if insulin doesn't get into the cells, that's what insulin resistance is. Some of the receptors that act like little ferry boats to take the insulin into the cells die off. So if it's not getting into the cells, it can't do its job.
And in pregnancy, that might mean preparing the breast to be able to make milk and starting that sort of.
Exactly. Building that milk factory during puberty, building the scaffolding, making the raw materials, leaving them there to be used during pregnancy, and then during pregnancy, making that whole milk factory.
Yeah. That's a good thing to understand. I don't know if you do this, but I like to join Facebook groups and lurk and see what people are saying. And there are a lot of IBCLC groups out there and all sorts of interesting information. What are your thoughts on blood work to assess the potential for low supply if that's a concern? And I use the if because, like we talked about earlier, it may be there's a difference between perceived low supply because we don't have a freezer full like somebody else does on Instagram, and there may be an actual supply issue going on, and how to tease that out.
Blood work's expensive. Not everybody has good insurance. Most insurance has co-pays. So in my population, I try to reserve blood work for moms where we're doing all the right things, but the milk production is falling. And sometimes we found moms whose prolactin is bottoming out or who are developing a postpartum thyroid disease for the first time. Or so we can find some of these things prophylactically. If you have great insurance and you have money and you want to do it, there's not really harm. The trick with biology is there's often a second and a third chance. So even if you have something working against you, like a higher BMI, and some insulin resistance, there are still things we can do. There's an old medication called metformin that helps sensitize the body toward insulin. And many moms with polycystic ovary syndrome, which is also an insulin resistance syndrome, who take metformin during the pregnancy can continue it during lactation. Very small amounts get to the baby, and it's very safe in the context of breastfeeding. Find that can help to maintain milk production, again, by fixing that insulin resistance. Moms who have high BMI, who have a slow start, that nursing more often, doing a little hand expressing after the baby's done nursing, just pushing those first few days. Moms with any kind of barrier, moms who have like slightly less milk-making tissue in their breast hypoplasia, it's called scientifically, they can make more milk by expressing really often, nursing the baby really often and hand expressing afterward. Moms who had breast reduction surgery, who've had some of that tissue taken out, can often make more milk by very early hand expression after nursing the baby very frequently. So if we like really push that system, many people can overcome whatever breaks their body is putting on. We want to help everybody to be able to enjoy that relationship with their baby. And we still can. I love nursing supplementers because when moms don't have quite enough milk, they can still have that relationship with the baby and still get, the baby can get every drop of their milk possible and get all of the immune benefits and all of the exercising their little face so all the bones grow just right and improving their airway and all those things we know that feeding at the breast does.
Yeah, you bring up so many great points. I feel like we could go so many different directions with this. One of the things, just while you're talking about the nursing supplementers, sometimes I think to people who want to induce lactation, right? And in inducing lactation, in this context, you might find yourself wondering if you have low supply or just maybe you're just grateful that whatever's coming in is coming in. And like you said, you're getting those other benefits of breastfeeding, but also able to supplement at the same time. And so you're getting all the breast milk you can, but also supplementing just to make sure the weight gain's there. What are your thoughts on how to maximize supply if somebody is inducing lactation?
There are two basic approaches. The old approach was we start pumping very short periods of time because when you're pregnant, your nipples are stretchy. Everything you get this hormone called relaxin that relaxes your joints and your skin so that fewer stretch marks, more your breasts can grow with less less pain, and the nipple can stretch into the baby's mouth without hurting.
Yes.
So that pumping, when you're inducing lactation, pumping isn't really comfortable at first. So we tell moms to lubricate their nipples with a little bit of edible oil, olive oil, coconut oil, whatever they have in their house, and just do very short periods, like 5 minutes, as many times a day as they can manage. And when they start seeing a drop of milk, to pump for longer.
Yes.
And I've had a number of moms make half or more than half of their baby supply for their adopted baby this way.
That's amazing.
The newer thing is to use hormonal medication, so a combination birth control pill for about 6 weeks to do that, start making the milk factory, and then taking prolactin releasing medication like domperidone, Reglan in the US, but it's got a lot of side effects. The domperidone is safer because it doesn't cross the blood-brain barrier. And that kicks up prolactin levels, and then continuing to pump or nurse once the baby comes.
That's amazing. I think that we can do that is amazing. Where do some people still use domperidone in the United States?
Yes, people can get it from overseas. New Zealand, it's over the counter in New Zealand, I believe, Mexico, Ireland, and it's prescription in Canada. So people can get prescriptions from Canadian doctors sometimes, and you want to be screened by your doctor, because if you're on other medications that can predispose to arrhythmia, so what it does is it can slow down the repolarization of your heart. So there are many things that can slow that down, and that can throw you into a unusual heart rhythm that can be dangerous. Now, most of the big problems with this issue are in people in their 70s and 80s who are getting larger doses, or people undergoing surgery who are getting large doses IV. We have not had any reports of problems with mothers taking it for lactation, but what worries doctors is that some mothers will take very large doses. You don't need a lot.
Got it.
So one pill 4 times a day is sufficient for most mothers, according to research. Again, I'm not prescribing because I'm not a physician, but that's what the research tells us. So I'm really fortunate to have several breastfeeding medicine physicians in the area that I can refer moms to if they would like to consider something like this. And they can screen the mother for other medication they're taking, or for a history of long QT syndrome or something.
That's awesome. You mentioned the breastfeeding medicine physicians. I think that's something that's evolving. And I was talking last week with one of the moms that I've worked with in the past, and she said that had I not been talking to her about the fact that there are breastfeeding medicine doctors who are more educated in breastfeeding medicine than others, she would not have known that. And so it was very helpful. So that's something that I think sharing with the general population, there's a resource there beyond, and sometimes you need that more than what we as lactation consultants do. And
if you have an infection you can't get rid of, and you need a culture, or you have a complex medical history, it's more than your IBCLC or UCLC can handle. Absolutely.
It's a great resource. Yeah.
There's room for all of us here.
Yes, exactly. There's so much to do.
Yes. We just have to know what we know and a little bit of what we don't know.
Yes, exactly.
Because our brain is really good at just ignoring what we don't know.
Right. So true. That is so true. One of the other things that I wanted to ask you about is your thoughts on wearable pumps as pertains to impacting milk production. A lot of times when we see moms returning to work, especially my moms who tend to prefer these the most are going to be in healthcare or teaching. And these I find there are definitely others, but those are a couple of the professions that I find that keep coming up as, hey, this would be great if I can use this when I return to work. What are your thoughts on them?
Right. So the wearable pumps have tiny motors, so they're less efficient. Now, anything's better than nothing, but But it's important to understand that if you're relying on a wearable pump, you're probably going to use it more often and for longer than if you were working with a pump that was more efficient. The larger motor, especially those nice old metal piston pumps that have that really beautiful, smooth sucking curve.
Yes.
Those are the most efficient.
And certainly, as we talked about, the initial period is really crucial for your long-term supply. However, you can get into issues if you're not moving that milk enough. Even 3 or 4 months in, if you're returning to work in that time frame, you still can get into issues where your breasts aren't emptying fully, and that could impact your supply. It could also lead to other things like clogged ducts and mastitis and all that. So
I love to teach hand expression, especially to moms who are going back to employment where they're not going to have really good breaks.
yes.
This hand expression can be really efficient.
Yes.
So you can take off an ounce from each breast in less than 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And at least keep the breast from getting over full.
Yes. You can do that in the time it takes to do a bathroom break or something like that.
Exactly.
So that's a really
Exactly.
good one.
I've done it in the bathroom.
Yes.
It's gross, but
Hey.
wash your hands before you go in.
Exactly, yeah.
Don't touch anything.
Exactly.
Bring a paper towel with you to close the door.
Exactly. So you brought up a great thing to talk about when babies are having a hard time in those early days. You want to give us some insight about what you recommend for moms doing at that time?
Absolutely. It can be really distressing as a new mom when your baby isn't latching. So sometimes it's the birth medication, and medicine we take during labor does get to the baby. It doesn't stop them from breathing like the stuff they used to give in the 60s and 70s, but it does affect their behavior and sometimes makes them sleepier so that they don't go to breast quite as well. So keeping the baby skin to skin as long as possible without people taking the baby away, that gives the baby the greatest chance of latching on. If you've had an epidural, it can take your baby closer to 2 hours to go to the breast by themselves in skin to skin versus about 45 to 50 minutes for babies who haven't been exposed to an epidural. So being more patient with the baby and making sure that you advocate for yourself to get that time where nobody disturbs your baby.
That's a great point.
They can do what they need to do while the baby's on mom.
Yes.
Except if there's an emergency, which of course we want them to save the baby's life first. But a lot of things are based on having that room ready for the next mama who's coming in, and just advocating for yourself or choosing your birth setting carefully can be really helpful. And then if the baby doesn't go to the breast and is taken away, doing that hand expression right away. We can give the colostrum to the baby in a teaspoon. My favorite trick for non-latching babies is let hand express those drops of precious colostrum into a clean spoon and feed the baby. If you have a partner, the partner can spoon feed the baby while you are expressing a couple of drops onto a spoon. Keep trading the spoons back and forth so that you have a little assembly line going. And once you get whatever drops you could get out into the baby, put that baby back skin to skin. So the baby gets the energy from that colostrum and then starts to sniff around. Where did that yummy stuff come from? Oh, it came from here. And that greatly increases the chance that the baby's going to latch.
That's wonderful.
And ask for help quick.
Yes. Early and often. That's what I always say. I love that one. Ask for help quick. So thoughts on, I worked with a baby once. We were over 24 hours and the baby hadn't been latching and sucking effectively. There had been no supplementation to this point. Blood sugar was fine. Respiration was fine. Temperature was fine. So the data looked okay, but we were maybe 28 hours in and the baby just hadn't latched. And so the mom was doing some of these drops and transferring them to baby, but they were becoming concerned. At what point would you say, okay, let's get the pump involved? Because the other part is we don't want to get the pump going too early and undermine mom's and baby's sort of natural flow of things.
Yeah, we know from Valerie Flowerman's research that moms who are taught to hand express for transient latch problems were more likely to be breastfeeding weeks or months later than moms who were given pumps.
Yes.
But hand expression early on is magic, and we're not quite sure why.
Yes.
I think one of the most important things is normal in what context. In the context of unmedicated birth and no separation, it's absolutely abnormal for babies not to eat for 28 hours. Absolutely abnormal. So part of this is because of the way we handle birth in this country, this culture. So I think that trying to go back to the more normal and then kick up that hand expression. Let's get spoonfuls into the baby.
Not just drops. Great point. Yeah.
Get as much as possible. Now, when you're hand expressing the first time you do it, especially if it's in the first hour after birth, you might get quite a lot. 10 milliliters, 2 teaspoons, 3 teaspoons, 4. But after that, it'll be small amount of drops until the second or third day, and then it'll pick up like crazy. So it's normal to have a lots, almost nothing, and then come back up. So that pattern is normal, but we want to try that first opportunity. If the baby isn't feeding, we want to really jump on that to get out as much as we can and get it into the baby.
Yeah. That's a great point. I love that. And I think that's really important. So I've asked my last question. I want to be respectful of your time. Is there anything else that you want to add, that you want to offer up? It's been so wonderful to have you on.
Thank you. It's been lovely to be here. Support. Find your tribe. I found my tribe in the OHA League. Yes. You might find your tribe at a baby cafe or an online mothers group. There are groups for pretty much anybody. There's groups for female physicians. There's groups for who are mothering right now. And there's so many different things, ways to find your tribe. But I would recommend that everybody find their tribe so that they have that support, because you feel so lonely when you're all alone with a newborn those first few weeks.
So true. And I think it's such a great point. And being cognizant of your mental health on that journey is crucial. I like saying, check in with yourself at each feed. Use that as like a marker to say, how am I doing? And I love that. Finding support that works for you. That's so crucial.
And sleep when that baby sleeps.
Yes. And it can sound so silly or just like a crazy notion that you would stop whatever you're doing and truly just go to sleep, but you've got to get the hours somewhere.
Tack towels over your windows. Make a dark nest room so that you can sleep no matter what time it is.
That's a great point. I love that. All right. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been lovely to have you.
My pleasure.
That was Catherine Watson Genna joining us today on the milk production. And as I said, I couldn't be more excited, proud that she decided to come on the show. Glad to share it with you all. Really good to pick her brain. And if you can't tell, I thought she made some excellent points along the way and found myself so routinely saying that I hope I didn't drive you guys crazy with it. But she did. She made some excellent points and gave great examples and guidance for our families in looking for that information about how our bodies decide to make milk and how we can foster the best environment for that milk production. So thank you, Catherine. You were such a gracious guest on the show, and I hope that we get to talk more about many of the subjects that we touched just the tip of the iceberg on in future episodes. It was a pleasure to have you. And that's it for today's episode. So thanks for joining. Comment, subscribe, follow, and any of the places you can find us on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Audible, and then on the socials on Instagram and Facebook. We do also have a website, themilkproduction.com. What I like about that is it's got a link. Obviously, you can watch the YouTube video there of our video podcast, but also it's got a blog style summary. So if you don't have the ability to listen to an episode or watch an episode, then you can go on there and get the summary of information in blog form if you prefer reading as opposed to watching. So hopefully you find that useful. Please let us know what more you'd like to see on the episode. Send us your comments, and we always love hearing from you. Thanks for joining today. Take care. Have a good one.